Hi, everybody. Welcome back to FreakSense TV. And today's episode is very special for me. It's a departure from what I typically do. And it's also with someone that I like and respect a great deal. And that's Mike Williams, the Sage of Quay. And today's show is a tribute to Mike Williams and all of his work. And in particular, his work on a band that we both really grew up enjoying and getting really deep into the music and lyrics of this group. And that band is the Beatles. And if you know anything about the Beatles music and the Beatles' role with Tavistock in the programming of society, in particular the youth of society, then you know Mike's work with the Beatles, on the Beatles, and of course the Paul is Dead entire scenario. And about 3-4 months ago, Mike announced that in June of this year, we're just about a month away, that he was going to be taking a step back from all of his intense research investigation into the Paul is Dead controversy. And then not that he was going to stay away from it permanently, but just not make it the principal focus of his incredible podcast. And in light of that, what I wanted to do was celebrate Mike in so many ways, but also for his stewardship of the Paul is Dead controversy or information, because I'm telling you, this could have turned into a complete circus across the truth community and on the internet, and it hasn't. And I think it's largely because Mike has been the steward of the Paul is Dead research. And of course, typical, if you know Mike Williams, then you know it is top-notch research. It is professional focus and presentation. And that's what we've got. And Colleen and I just love to watch really anything that Mike does. And all through the Paul is Dead podcast, they have been top-notch. And in particular, Mike posted about a month ago on his channel, The Sage of Quay, a couple of very important videos for you to watch. And one of them was the 20 questions, 20 most common questions answered. And then Mike just on his own, just responds to them. And that is an archive, a permanent resource for you to go back to. And I agree with all 20 aspects of Mike's assertions in his responses to those 20 most pertinent questions on Paul is Dead and the Beatles. So with all of that, let's start the celebration by introducing Mike. Mike, you just got back from vacation and you're feeling good and fresh. And thank you very much for being on the show, my friend.
Well, thank you, Charlie. That was a wonderful introduction. And yes, Barry and I just got back from vacation, and it was very pleasant. We spent some time down in Florida. Her family is down there. And then we ended up the week with a couple of days in Daytona Beach, which was wonderful. The weather was just awesome.
Yeah, and I saw quite a few of your photos from, I think that they were from Daytona Beach, were they?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. The earth sure looked flat. Now, I don't know if that was just me reading something into it, but did you get that sense?
I got that sense. Every time I look at the horizon, Charlie, it's flat as can be.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, and that sun, boy, I'll tell you, I was just thinking, because your picture was so beautiful of the rising sun there on Daytona Beach, and I was just thinking, boy, is it ever a great thing that gravity is selective with certain things, and it doesn't have an effect on our sun, because that would be a drag if the sun just stayed down low on the horizon every single day because of that darn gravity.
Yeah, no, it was beautiful sunrises the days that we were there, and I was able to get some great shots. We were staying at the hotel there, at the Hilton, in fact, and we were on the fourth floor. And so I'd wake up in the morning and I had this beautiful, beautiful view. And I was able to take those pictures. Barry had some also. And, when I took the pictures, we were both commenting that what an awesome world this really is. It's really what you make it, Charlie. It really is. We could talk about all the nasty, ugly stuff that goes on in the world, but then you wake up in the morning and you take a look at a beautiful sunrise, and it really brings it together. For me, it does.
Yeah, no, it really does. And there was just something about those photos. They really were beautiful, and they captured a real beautiful aspect to this world. And it just, you made on one of the photos, you just made the comment about, boy, it just sure looks, just a note, everyone, it just sure looks flat to me. I thought, man, does it ever, huh? Yeah. But hey, listen, Colleen told me yesterday that, that they're going to be putting a man and a woman back on the moon soon, and they can have sex up there and start producing some children up on the moon. That's just, wow, that's going to be so exciting. I just love modern science.
It's just more conditioning for the masses, Charlie. And what it is they are communicating the truth to a certain degree. It's just a matter of being able to peel back the onion and to decode their messages, So I've covered a lot of that with my discussions with Martin Kenny. So we really have to not take their message at face value. In other words, you just can't stay at the veneer level. You've got to dig deeper. And when you dig deeper and you understand the esoteric meanings behind what it is they're telling us, then we will have a much better understanding of our reality.
Excellent point. And you talked about the peel back the onion, and that is a tremendous segue into the Beatles and Glass Onion and the White Album, which there was a lot. There was a lot going on with the White Album and the Beatles, and I really got a sense. We're going to get into this later in the show, but boy, did I ever get a sense that if there was ever an album that was, the four corners of human physiology, north, south, east, west, and each one of them going in a different direction, boy, the White Album was that, because he had Fall with all of his social engineering, preparing for Charlie Manson and whatever else was coming down the pipe. And then you had Lennon letting out as much of his personal frustrations and some deeper insight into the Beatles, into Paul Fall, and into organized society. And then you had George with Piggies in particular, laying things out as openly and honestly and as spiritually correct as you could. And then, there was Ringo playing in the bathtub. So it really was an album where they were just going in four diverse directions. And we will get to that. So let's just start with the roots and just tell us, the first time you came into contact with the Beatles and what your experience was like growing up. So was it your teen years, Mike?
Well, I was actually 5 years old, and I remember the Beatles being on TV, the Ed Sullivan Show. And I also bugged my parents back in 1968 to go see Yellow Submarine. So I had already watched A Hard Day's Night as a kid, and I watched Help. And then I was dying to go see Yellow Submarine. And I didn't realize at the time, Charlie, that it was an animation. So I thought I was going to see the real Beatles. And so my father took me and my brother. My brother is a year and a half younger than I am. And I know it was torturous for my dad. He had no clue what was going on, And so hats off to you, Dad, for sitting there for 90 minutes. And I remember watching Yellow Submarine, and I was disappointed, I thought, well, where are the Beatles? I didn't realize this was going to be a cartoon. And then at the end, they make a cameo.
Yeah.
And, that was worth the price of the ticket for me. And so at a very young age, I was 9 in 1968. I was born in 1959. And I was already very much into them. And then
Wow.
what happened was, my dad had bought a very cheap acoustic guitar. He was taking some lessons at a local school for, adult education. And, dad just kind of strummed around with it a little bit. And it was my brother and I that actually wound up picking up the guitar. Dad gave it up. And we started trying to play it. And the way I became versed in playing chords was I went out and I bought Beatle music, sheet music, where they would show me the chords. And like
Nice.
everybody else that starts playing guitar, I had to struggle with how to, to form an E chord or a
Yep.
G or a C and so on. And so I did that. And by the time the 1970s rolled around, like the early 1970s, I had Beatle records and I was listening to them. And by 1976, we had in our high school on Long Island, they allowed the students to be able to pull together lectures and to bring in guest speakers, which was great. And so I had a friend of mine, Adam, and he had an older brother, Doug. And Doug was, probably 4 or 5 years older than us. And he knew all about the Beatle clues, the Paul is Dead clues from the album covers and, playing the records backwards and all the backmasking. And so I asked Doug if he would come in and be our guest speaker. And he said, sure. And I put these flyers all around, the school, and I didn't know how many people were going to show up. I thought, maybe I'm going to be the only guy sitting there, maybe me and a couple of friends, And so Doug comes in with all his records, and he comes in with a record player so he can play stuff backwards. And we had a packed classroom.
Wow.
And that was back in 1976. And, that was about the time, too, that I was probably a good 3 years, 4 years into really playing guitar at that time. I really started playing around 15, 16 years old, where I got a lot more serious about it. So, my whole Beatle awareness goes back to when I was a very, very young kid. When I think about it, it's very weird, especially for a kid who is, 7, 8, 9 years old, having such affection and a connection to this band. And in fact, it's strange. I put this video up on Facebook about a month ago or so, but I went to go see Billy back in 2001. And it was the back in the U.S. tour,
Oh, Lord.
And he was playing in Florida, and I bought VIP tickets. And because I thought, well, this is when I still thought he was Paul. And I thought to myself, well, he's getting older now, and this might be the last time I get a chance to go see him. And so I had third row center stage, and he was right there. And lo and behold, they released the DVD the next year in 2002. And during the song Jet, there I am in the audience. So I have a cameo in his concert DVD. So it's very strange, the whole thing, that somehow, for some reason, I am connected into this band, and for reasons I really can't explain. I don't know why it is. I'm the one that has been carrying this forward, going back about 3 years ago. Now, there are other researchers, obviously, that have been involved in this, so I don't want to slight them in any way. Many of them have done some very, very good work. But in my case, what has benefited me is I have a fairly large platform on YouTube. So, when you have 16,000 subscribers, it's not gigantic, but it's enough to be able to, rattle the cage a little bit and get people to pay attention. So that's basically the history, and back in, I guess it was 2016 is when I read the Memoirs of Billy Shears. It was, I guess, early summer. And I picked the book up on a lark. I was in Amazon and I was taking a look at some stuff. I get my books from Amazon. I try to get them used because they're a lot cheaper. And the Memoirs of Billy Shears popped up. And I said, oh, let me take a look at this. So I ordered it and I read it. And when I read it, it blew me away. Now, contrary to what a lot of people like to say, that I just took the book and ran with it. What I did with the book, Charlie, was I used it as a baseline. So it was a point of reference. So Memoirs would make certain statements, or the narrative would say certain things. And so what I did was I went off and to either validate or debunk what it is that was being stated in the book. And as I went along that process, I was finding that I wasn't debunking very much, that I was validating virtually all of it. And that's why it's been used for me as a foundational piece of my research. It's a springboard. And there are areas that I've gotten into in my research that have nothing to do with memoirs. In fact, the whole concept of a street Paul versus just Billy, that didn't come out of memoirs. That came to me from another source, a very good source, who clued me in as to how this worked, and we can get into that later. Also, the whole video I did recently on 6 toes versus 5 toes, right?
Incredible podcast. Yeah, we just watched it last night.
Yeah, that's not in memoirs. So that's how it started, and so for the last 3 years, it has been a focal point of my research, my conspiracy and alternative research. But I've reached a point now, as you've mentioned, where I'm going to step back, and the reason why, folks, is not because of anything other than the fact that I have put a lot of information out there, and I've gotten to the point where you hit diminishing returns. In other words, there's not a whole lot more to talk about. And so, what I've put out. And as you've mentioned, Charlie, if more information comes forward and that information is significant, then I will step back in and I will research it and I will report on it. But it's not going to be something where it's going to be ongoing forevermore. I'm not in it for the entertainment value, if you will. I'm in it so that we can try to figure out what the truth is with regard to the Beatles and Paul McCartney.
Well, and thanks for sharing all of that. And again, just to make this point so clear to the listeners, is that this is such an important subject, because when it comes to what we think of as modern culture or pop culture, in so many ways, it's the end of World War II and it's the 1950s. And the 50s was very, very much a controlled, you can feel it, and you can see it in everything that they did. And there weren't a lot of big stars here, there, and everywhere. There weren't. Because these were people they needed to control, and they brought them in carefully, and they monitored them, and they monitored what they could and couldn't do and what they'd get away with. And I think when the those architects of our modern pop culture felt comfortable enough, which clearly was around 1960, Kennedy in the White House, 61, 62. And I think when they felt comfortable and felt they had a good handle on it, what they served up to the world more than anything else was the Beatles. And Paul McCartney, Lennon-McCartney is an institution of pop culture. And if we don't understand what's going on with Lennon-McCartney and this creation of the Beatles, then we're not understanding pop culture. And that it would be a terrible mistake, because in the understanding of the Beatles saga, and I don't think there's a better way of saying it than the saga of the Beatles, lies the understanding of the problems with humanity. And when we get to that level, then the solutions will start to present themselves. But if you start trying to resolve things without understanding, it's like when you get into the truth community and you come across certain people. There's a lot of people that don't like to admit to the fact that they've poke their noses or heads into different doorways and listen to different things. But there's a couple of people, probably the best examples would be Bashar and Abraham, who are, channeling alien entities, which of course don't exist. And they're, telling us deeper aspects to the secret. And of course, there's the absolute basis in truth there, because what you hold inside of you, what you formulate as your belief system, dominates your thoughts. And whatever your thoughts are is dominating your physical actions. That's your reality. But with people like this, what you're finding is that they give you a little bit, and then they lead you down different corridors. And these are not corridors to the truth. They take you so far, and then they divert you. And this is really the essence to the importance of understanding the Beatles saga and understanding what's going on with Paul is dead and the Paul fall reality, because it is at the heart of what Tavistock, thus the CIA, were doing. It's hand in hand with LSD. It's their control of the response to the freak movement in the 50s, which was the hippie movement in the 60s. And it is still at the basis. As Mark Devlin has done such an incredible job. And I don't think a lot of people have really got that message strong enough from Mark's work, which is that through the electronic music today that, Mark is seeing with all of these big festivals and concerts and whatnot, it's essentially the hippie era again, just spun a little differently. And you've got these gurus on stage in front of 100,000 people who are now spinning music live. And, put your hands up. 100,000 people put your hands up. Turn yourselves around in a circle. 100,000 people turn themselves in a circle. Now look into my eyes. This is how it works. Again, always creating this reality of that we're worthless. There are people who are special, and listen to them, follow what they have to say. And this is, modern pop culture, and the Beatles were at the heart of it. And again, thank goodness that you have been at the forefront. And there are some other good researchers with the Paul is dead research. But thank goodness that you've been at the forefront of it, because it could have turned into a shit show, for a lack of better expression. And it hasn't. It hasn't, because you've taken this so seriously. And for listeners, let me just throw a couple other things about Mike. Mike is a really, really good songwriter. So Mike knows what it takes to write a really good song. Mike is a very, very good guitar player. So Mike understands the mechanics of creating a song and how the music and the chords tie into the lyrical realm. And Mike is an excellent lyricist as well, who is layering his own music and dealing with the highest human truths. So you have this connection to the band, and again, thank goodness that you do, because you understand. You're a person that's made of music. You understand music. You have created, with your 2 albums, you've created top-notch music. So if there is somebody who's qualified to look at all of this and to speak on all of this, I can't think of a better example. And then, for someone to have that connection to the band from such a early age, you were telling us, again earlier, just from 5 years old, that's really powerful. And it, that's why I just know this podcast today is going to just continue to be so special, because there are insights here that the average person may not have thought of. And then you can apply this to your understanding of the Beatles, organized society itself, and therefore your own relationship with organized society. So again, thank you for sharing all of that. And a couple of notes I just made here. One, you talked about your YouTube channel, Sage Quay, currently has 16,000 plus subscribers. Boy, if there's anybody that should have 160,000 plus subscribers, it's Mike. So if you're not already subscribed to Sage Quay, do so. It's not a difficult thing to do, but you're supporting someone who is genuine, authentic, really, really clever, quite a wise individual, deep spiritual understandings, And Mike is going to the heart of the matter on all of his podcasts. These are top-notch podcasts. So if you aren't already subscribed to Mike's channel, go there and subscribe and stay in touch and stay informed with the mind of Mike Williams. It is well worth doing. And then I'm just going to segue over here to Tom Harriet's. I think you feel the same way as I do, because on your recommendation, I got Memoirs of Billy Shears and I read it. And like you, I was blown away as well. And when you read it, what you come to understand is that this isn't just some guy making shit up. There are things that Tom has insights to that we're talking a handful of people that probably certain members of the Beatles, Ringo, probably don't even know. There are aspects that certain members of the Beatles probably don't even know themselves. So this is not some crass attempt to sell a book. In fact, everything about the book, from the price of the book and the lack of, remember that, Mike, really sort of the lack of really advertising or press about the book and everything. It was not geared to sell a ton of copies or anything. Everything about that book is deeply esoteric, is steeped in the deep esoteric. And it is a fantastic read, and so is the new book. What is the title of the blue book?
It's not the 9 after 909 edition. That was the book that was released September 9th of last year, 2018.
So I wanted to just make the comment and get your thoughts on that. But I thought Tom, as an author, did an unbelievable job, because he was not put into an easy situation. Clearly, Billy is not in an easy situation. His situation is very, very complex, but that puts Tom into an even more complex situation. And really, how they pulled this off is actually quite impressive. So your thoughts on Tom and the actual writing of the book?
Well, I have nothing but nice things to say about Tom. We connected around 2.5 years ago after I read the first edition of the book, which was released on September 9th, 2009. So Billy's all about the nines, and we can get into that a little later, Charlie. But so I wanted to get Tom on my show to talk about the book. And initially, Tom had said to me that, okay, he could come on and do a show. And then about a week later, we exchanged emails, and he said, Mike, I can't do any interviews. He didn't say I couldn't do your show. He said he couldn't do any interviews. So I knew what that meant without Tom having to spell it out. But what I believe happened was he had to run it by legal counsel, and they advised him not to do any interviews, because in order for Tom to do the book, he had to sign non-disclosures and confidentiality agreements. And so I'm sure the advice was that as much as you're going to watch what you say and measure what you say, there's always the possibility you could say something that will breach your contract or breach your agreement. And you do not want to put yourself in that position. And so it was at that point that Tom actually wrote me back and said, hey, Mike, if I get other requests to do interviews, if I give them your name, would you mind doing the interviews? And I said to Tom, no, I don't have any problem doing that. I said, but we need to be clear that I'm not going to be towing the book's
exactly
storyline, right? So in other words, what I was saying to Tom was that where I disagree or where I have questions, I'm going to voice them. So I'm not here to sell the book. And, Tom wrote me back. He says, fair enough. That's fine. And so as time has progressed, Charlie, Tom and I are acquaintances. We have exchanged emails a number of times over the last 3 years, mostly when I have questions about the book or a certain passage that Billy has in the book, and I wanted to maybe get a better understanding or more clarification about what was being said. And Tom was very gracious And where he was able to give me more information or where he was able to explain in more detail, he would. Now, there are times when he couldn't, because the questions I was asking ventured into areas that he was not able to disclose. Because, as I mentioned, just before, he signed non-disclosures and confidentiality agreements to do this book. But the relationship between Tom and I at this point is very friendly on a very professional basis. We're not like sitting in a bar somewhere having beers, but it's professional. I respect his work. He did tremendous work with the book, The Memoirs of Billy Shears. Yeah, I mean, the encoding itself is an amazing, amazing undertaking.
It is.
And maybe we could talk a little bit about that. Tom did share with me how that came about. And he respects my output. When I talk about the book or I have shows about Paul is Dead. So there's a mutual respect for each other's work, and that's the basis of our relationship.
And it makes sense to me because I don't get, and through you, I have just a tiny bit of a relationship with Tom. We're friends on Facebook, and typically when I do something that is very esoteric, he'll out of the blue chime in something, make a comment, and and then I'll make a comment back, and that might lead to a couple more comments or something. So I have a little bit of a relationship there. But again, it doesn't surprise me in what you said, because what I don't get from the book and what I don't get from Tom is that he's some kind of evil societal creep that is putting all of this above our heads, has been read into all of this, is all part of the subterfuge to keep the masses as ignorant fools. No, I don't get that sense at all. And I think that the reason that he really likes and respects you, and I know that he does, is that your approach to this and your questions that you're reading is probably what he would like to do. It's probably some of the things that he would like to say. But again, I just wanted to bring that point up, because when you just take a step back and think about the legal ease of this situation, all of the different people that are being involved here, and that's just in and around, not just in and around Paul McCartney, but everybody else with regard to the band. Wow, that is stick handling through a field of dynamite. And you just have to tip your hat. He has done an incredible job. And like you said, the encoding in the book. Wow, folks. I mean, I'm somebody that can say that I understand the deep esoteric, and wow. So it's just an impressive read, and his connection to you makes perfect sense to me, Mike.
Yeah, I mean, there's some folks out there that say, he wrote the book because he was trolling Paul is Dead forums and stuff like that. It's total nonsense, absolute nonsense. I can tell you, based upon my correspondences with Tom, that Tom is a very, very bright guy. And his depth of knowledge and his understanding of the esoteric, just alternative research, is top shelf. And so, folks who make comments like that are really speaking out of ignorance.
They are.
They are. And, they don't know the man. I'm not saying that, I know, like I said, Tom is not a personal friend. We have as I've mentioned, a professional relationship. But again, look, I spent 32 years in the corporate world working with corporate professionals. And I know a professional when I meet one. Okay. And Tom is a professional. So, for those that want to continue to say silly things, they will say those things. Charlie, you know that, right? We both have YouTube channels, and we see what kind of nonsense comes across our screen as far as, comments and stuff like that. You just have that element out there that are just going to make those types of comments. they are unknowing. I had a high-level Freemason contact me months ago, and he was very interested in the my Paul is Dead work. And they gave me a quote, and he said to me that there are two classes of people. There are those that possess the key for knowledge, yep, and there are those that do not. And that was that. And every once in a while, I have brought that up on a number of shows, and there are a lot of people who don't like that statement because they believe it to be too binary. And my response back to them is, it doesn't matter what you think exactly of that statement. What I'm telling you is how they, the people that are within the pyramid of power, how they look at the population. Okay, so you're either going to be in the camp that possesses the key for knowledge, or you're not going to be. And by the way, I mean, from their perspective, it's okay. You know, wherever you want to land is where you land. But the way it works is, for those that show an intrepidness toward knowledge and wisdom, you will be given more knowledge and wisdom to help you further develop your path going forward. I get a lot of flack because people will say to me that I don't beat up on the Freemasons, you know, that I don't kick them in the shins every chance that I have. And the reason why I don't do that is because, you know, I've got acquaintances and people I know that are Freemasons, and these are good people. Okay, not every Freemason is up to his eyeballs in evil doing. You know, I try to explain to folks that many men that join the Freemasons do it because, first of all, it was carried through their family, their ancestry, and the other reason is because it brings it's business networking involved in it, you know. And some people don't like that either. Oh, they're getting an advantage because they're Freemasons. I don't know what to tell you, but you know, you have to take a step back and take a look at how the world really works. You know, and that's how the world really works. You know, I said in a couple of videos, the world, the way things are communicated is signs and symbols, not sure words and laws, right? Sure signs and symbols. And so the more you get to know and understand about the esoteric, about the underpinnings of the secret societies, the better off you're going to be. If you're just going to fill your mind with a bunch of hate, and you're going to carry on and have temper tantrums and just parrot whatever it is that you're hearing on some other YouTube channel or some other pundit or whatever you're reading on the web, you're putting yourself at a disadvantage, you know? So the way I look at it is, I'm not embracing anything. I'm not embracing Freemasonry. You know, I look at it and I try to approach it objectively. The way I approach it is, what can I get out of this that will make me smarter, that will make me understand this reality some more? And in order to do that, you have to stay objective, because as soon as you become subjective, you have put yourself at a disadvantage. You know? Yep. So anyway, so I just want to say that too. And again, I'm saying this, you and I having this conversation, and I'll receive emails and PMs about, you know, the fact that, you know, I'm one of them. I've been accused of being a Freemason. I've been accused of being in the Illuminati. No, I'm just a guy that is very, very interested and intrigued by how this reality works, and within the very fabric of this reality are secret societies. So if you're not going to take the time to try to understand it, really understand it, you know, then you're going to be unknowing, and I don't want to be in the unknowing.
Well, and I'm so glad that you say that, because this really takes us full circle already to the heart and soul of the show, and that is that there are some people that roll their eyes on all of this because it's the Beatles, it's pop music, it's Paul McCartney, but you just need to understand it isn't. What this is the veneer, the fabric that has been dropped over the masses from 1958, really in earnest from 1962 onwards. And if we're going to understand where we're at and how we get out of this from an organized sense, you have to understand the saga of the Beatles and the Paul is Dead, because it is at the very heart of the subterfuge. And everything that you just said is holistic in nature. I did a podcast a few months ago called Illuminati Symbolism, the Black Eye Club, and the Creation of the False God. And in that video, what I talked about is that the vehicle that carries all of this within organized society is Freemasonry. And there's, from my research, there's very, very good evidence to suggest that, for example, the entire creation of the United States was planned out and was carried out by the Freemasons. And pretty much everybody knows that. If you look at any of the main key founding fathers, they were all very deep, powerful Freemasons. And that having the United States be this wildly independent, free country that had a revolution, did they really, how much and how could they have possibly defeated the Brits, who at that time the treasury was being run by the Rothschilds and whomever is behind the Rothschilds. So you're fighting a war against a well-established institution that has endless coffers because of this fake money system that was already in play in the financial district of London. And the United States somehow wins. I think maybe we just need to take a second look at all of this, because remember, the creation of the United States and what it stood for after the revolution is what guided how the entire world played itself out right up until today. Now the United States is falling apart because that's what they need it to do. But this is where freedom comes from. And this is why people latched on to this ridiculous notion of communism and attacked it as the enemy, because it's the opposite of what America stood for. And everybody knew that America stood for freedom and independence. So it's very, very clever, and they're very clever. But in that podcast, what I did is I just showed how these people have hijacked Freemasonry. And it doesn't make Freemasonry bad or evil in any way, shape, or form. And again, the first thing you need to understand about any secret society is that you're read into this in increments, in levels. And the higher you go, the more you're read into. And it's a pyramid. And so most of the people are doing all of the work and are holding up the weight of those at the very top of the pyramid at the base. So there are so many Freemasons that don't have the slightest idea of what they're in and what the history is, other than, there's a lot of charities. They do a lot of charity work, and they do it because, there's some really good contacts with their businesses, and it gives them a bit of a leg up. And that's, the hallmark and essence of capitalism anyways. Everyone's just trying to get a leg up somewhere for their little business. So to run Freemasonry into the ground is what they want. This is the Phoenicians, really, this is what Rome is. These are the pirates of the seas, the Phoenicians who conquered the seas, and they took the rules that they created out on the lawless oceans that cannot be ruled and cannot be governed, and they brought the law that they created out of chaos and they put it on land. And the first place they brought it inland to was Rome. And that's why today everything is based in and around the Roman Catholic Church, Rome being the center of their land-based business. So these are the people, these are the devils, these are the demons that are behind this. And they're a very, very small group. But they used Freemasonry because Freemasonry is very impressive. It's an organization that stays true to its tenets. It stays true to itself. And on a show with Mark, I equated the Freemasons and the people in the Freemasons very much like it was a civilian military, because with Freemasons, The good soldier always looks forward, never looks behind. The good Freemason always is looking ahead, always looking to get up to the next level. And so there's a lot of things that are going on around them that they're not aware of, because they're constantly just looking for the next opportunity to go higher and higher and higher and higher and higher. So it is a very good framework for these Phoenicians to have taken over and then used, because one of the hallmarks or tenets of Freemasonry is keep your mouth shut.
Right. Right. And they communicate in signs and symbols, right? So that's a way to... Exactly.
And let me just quickly interject, and we'll get right back over to you again. And that point is such a key too. So like you were saying, someone told you high up in, or someone within Freemasonry contacted you and said that, and it's absolutely true. There are two groups of people in this world, and one is very small and the other is very massive, and you can determine which is which. There's a group that has been read into the truth, and the truth is that God first wrote his story in the night sky. So everything is astrological based. And so what are the heavens? Signs and symbols. That's what there's no words in the sky. And I guarantee you that whatever religion that you think you're part of, or you espouse to, or you belong to, that religion is based on God's astrology. Even if you think that this is devil worshiping, trust me, it's all based upon God's creation. And this is the number 9. Paul Billy Shears, Billy is all about the number 9. Number 9 is God consciousness. Number 9 is God consciousness. The one-upsmanship that you get from people like the higher read-in people of the Freemasonry, like Billy or these Phoenicians, is that they know the truth about God and we don't. And that's what this is all about. Either you've been read into signs and symbols and therefore the truth. There's a singular truth. Santos Bonacci calls this syncretism, and he's absolutely right. That at the heart of every single thing, pop music as well, a certain chord within a certain song, at the heart of every single creation is that one thing. And that one thing is that we're all connected, and it all filters right back down to the very heart of what this creation is, which again just leads back to the Creator. And we're all connected into this, and it's all signs and symbols. And you either understand astrology, you either understand symbology, or you don't. And if you don't, I'll let you in on the secret that Mike didn't say, and that is you're part of the 99.999999% that doesn't know. You don't know, and you're guessing. And the best you can do is guess with the clues that these people have left for you. And this is a rigged game. It's a rigged game that few ever win or ascend out of. You need to understand this deep esoteric, and however that happens, that's the difference between these people who have power and control and those who are part of the masses and don't. They understand the heart of the truth, which is signs and symbols. Back over to you, Mike.
That's exactly right, Charlie. And this is something that I've been trying to get across to my audience. I had mentioned on a show with Patricia Steer that based upon reading the Memoirs of Billy Shears, especially the new book, the blue-covered book, that I am now researching Luciferianism and Satanism. And I caught some grief for that. You know, some folks commenting and saying, "Oh, look at this, he's getting into the dark stuff now." And as I said before, you have to stay objective. You have to understand how this world works. What are the mechanics behind the reality? You know, if you're just going to avoid it and you're going to stick your head in a hole and you're just going to, put blinders on, then good luck. You're going to continue to just bang around like a pinball in a pinball machine aimlessly. And I don't want to fly blind, And, in the book, The Memoirs of Billy Shears, Billy's giving us tremendous insight into what I refer to as the pyramid of power, into Luciferianism, into the deep state, into mind control, into social engineering, into the occult, into magic, into Crowley. This is all very important stuff because this is how the world works. A lot of people don't want to hear this, you know, but if you start researching and you start digging in, and you have to stay objective, you will learn what this reality is all about and how it works, and how to navigate it, how to better navigate it. That's the most important thing, to avoid the bear traps that are out there for us, because there's traps all over the place. You mentioned before, like a minefield, right?
It really is, and they all lead down these corridors that go absolutely nowhere. And you know, like I say, even the truth community itself is just filled with these doors of subterfuge. And you know, I think the point that I'd really like to get across here to everyone to understand is this: if you stick your head in the ground, like Mike said, you might as well go and join up with some religion, because that's what the literalist Christian or the literalist Buddhist or the literalist Hindu, it doesn't matter. This is anyone who doesn't think for themselves, doesn't research for themselves, doesn't check, double check, triple check everything for themselves. The moment that you just accept what somebody else says for you, you might as well just become part of some religion. And in fact, you might as maybe just head down to, you know, one of these compounds, and there'll be some nice religious leader with Kool-Aid there for you as well, because that's where it's headed. These people who are the priest class of organized religions do not stand for God. They do not stand for love. They do not stand for the truth. They are the opposite of that. The Catholic Church, it doesn't matter what you think this is. This simply is. The Catholic Church is the most dishonest and upside down institution that you could possibly ever. Has nothing to do with God. It has nothing to do with Yeshua or Jeheshua, or what they call Jesus Christ in the Bible. It has nothing to do with any of those things. They've just literalized it to turn you into an ape, a monkey, so that you'll believe in the ridiculous notion of evolution. The truth that these people, Billy Shears, and all of these people who have been read into it and who are the true architects behind what is called as the Illuminati, and that's a horrible choice of words because they're not the illuminated ones. They have access to the illuminating truth, but they clearly don't practice it. And what the truth is that there is one truth. And that one truth always leads back to the one, which is the creator. And this is why everywhere you look in society, organized society, with all of their false flag events or anything that they do, and all of the symbols that the pop stars are doing, they're all making the pyramid symbol. Pyramids are evil, devil. There's something devil. I don't know what it is, but there's got to be something devil about a pyramid. No, a pyramid is an incredibly important shape for meditation. That's what pyramids were for. We don't have time to get into this, but it's an incredibly powerfully good, wonderful shape. 666, the little 666 on their foreheads. The number 6 is an incredibly powerful, good number. It's the number of man. It's our purpose, the journey up to the 6th chakra inside of the third eye within our bodies. We can only go 6 in our bodies before we illuminate the crown chakra 7, which is above. So the number 6 is beautiful. And 666, 6 plus 6 plus 6 is 18. 18 in most ancient languages, Hebrew in particular, is a symbol, and it's the symbol for chi, which is the energy of life, which is the ether, which is electromagnetism, which is what keeps us going eternally. So, and then 1 plus 8, 18, 1 plus 8 is 9. 9 right. Is God. And yet 666 is evil. No, it's not. This is what they so cleverly do. Pyramids, 666, and the horns and all these little symbols, they all relate back to God's one truth. And it's just been perverted. And you think that these things are the devil or Satanism or whatever, because you, like Mike said, you've not been read into this. You haven't done your homework. You haven't looked at the stars in the skies. And that's where the truth is, folks. I'm sorry, but that's where the truth is.
You're right, Charlie. And the enlightenment piece of it is up to you. It's within you. So what the controllers do is, they litter the place with all kinds of disinformation, all kinds of deception. But at the end of the day, it's up to you to use your discernment and your God-given gift of intellect and reason to be able to figure out what's true and what is not.
Yep.
And, so they're not forcing you to do anything. They are really not forcing you to do anything. You have the ability not to do what it is that you don't want to do. Okay.
Exactly
so,
true.
Yeah. And so many folks, they don't understand this. They don't realize this. And so they just fall in line and they march along single file. And this is why, let me just say this. The world, the reality that we live in, exists the way it exists because the mass consciousness has a certain belief system, has directed its thoughts and its consciousness in a certain direction. And that direction it's focused on has created this reality. So if you don't like your reality, which many of us don't, those of us who are awake, well, we have ourselves to blame because we put our minds, our thoughts, and our consciousness in that direction. So if we're able to wake up, I mean, in mass, critical mass, you're going to see your reality is going to change. It's going to be very different. And so the key to it is that, you have to turn your brain on. You have to turn your mind on. You have to turn your consciousness on. You got to hit that on switch, folks. And stop just believing everything that is fed to you. Sitting in front of the television as an example and just being force-fed a bunch of crap day in and day out.
Yeah.
It goes for what you put into your body. It goes, if you're eating GMO, if you're not filtering your water, if you're buying into the whole Western medicine debacle, and you're going along with the program, then you're going to have a life that is sub-optimized. I'll put it that way.
Yep.
You will have an extremely sub-optimized life, and you have no one to blame but yourself because
exactly true.
The truth is there. You just have to go seek it.
It is. A real quick little segue here. For thousands of years, there have been texts written all over the place relating to juicing, just eating the juice, in particular just of fruits, but fruits and vegetables, just eating plants and just in particular juicing. And there are some very, very powerful books. There is a lot of doctors who have gone down this, have had unbelievable, powerful test responses with their patients by just getting them onto a juicing diet. There are so many documentaries that are now out there about juicing, just, going out and getting your own or growing your own fruits and vegetables and then just juicing them. And the effects of it. This isn't rocket science. This isn't difficult. It's not hard to find. And there are stories everywhere about, people that have been diagnosed with terminal cancer, given a month to live. And in 2 weeks after being on a strict juicing diet, not only are they no longer terminally ill with cancer, they're off all of their meds as well. So this is a very, very, very widespread, simple truth that is so easy to prove, right? The human mind is a laboratory and the human body is a laboratory, and we're scientists and we're supposed to just be doing experiments all the time. So why don't you just experiment with juicing your food for a couple of weeks and just see what happens? Doesn't work for you? Hey, listen, it doesn't work for you, but maybe just give it a try. And again, if even 10% of the population tomorrow just started juicing their food, we'd have a worldwide revolution. We'd have a revolution that couldn't be stopped, peacefully couldn't be stopped, simply because of what these 10% would find just by juicing their food. This truth and this knowledge has been around forever, and it's in your face. People are going out of their way, as Mike is suggesting, to hide themselves from the truth.
They are,
because you're not going to find any truth within the mainstream media or organized society. And even if they were benevolent, you just need to think about this, folks. They're in charge. How do you stay in charge? By staying in charge. So you do what you need to do to stay in charge. Easiest thing to do, game of chess. Get them to fight amongst one another. Well, you're the commentator on both sides fighting. You tell them how they're each doing and give each side some more hope and some more information, and they just keep fighting amongst themselves forever. That's all this is. That's all this is.
Yeah, each one of us has to take the initiative to better our lives. And instead of waiting for somebody else to tell us what to do, where to be, where to go, how to get there, and that's how most of the population, that's how they operate, Charlie. They wait to be told what to do and how to do it. And the truth of the matter is that you are your own authority, right? They disempower. We all do this. I've done this, right? I mean, I haven't been awake, since the day I was born. I went through a process of transformation where I woke up one day, so I was on that hamster wheel as well. But, we disempower ourselves when we hand our sovereignty and our authority over to somebody else. That's why, we're told as a kid, obey authority figures. Yeah. Police wear guns. It's why, you're supposed to not question somebody who wears a white coat and a stethoscope, right? Don't ever question that person. I'm not trying to be, difficult and say that you need to be a jerk about this. All I'm saying is that take a step back and reclaim yourself, reclaim your sovereignty, empower yourself, be your own authority, use your mind, use your brain, use your intellect, use your reasoning, and start making decisions that way. So instead of just sitting back and being dictated to. And that's how most of the population operates.
It is. And this is a perfect segue into the second part of the show today, because in doing my research on for the show today and going back into the heart of the lion and the heart of the matter back in 68 and 69, Mike, I was blown away by the amount of people, like you were talking about your school companion back in 76. I went back and I researched right in the depths of 68 and 69 after the release of Sgt. Pepper's. And the amount, this wasn't like one or two people. The amount of people that we were so awake in the 60s and were so in tune to the clues that were being dropped on the Beatles albums about Paul is dead I couldn't believe it. Is one of the things I was so excited to share with you today. Is I had no idea how many people knew, and reading some of the stuff that they wrote back in 68, 69, no internet. You got to remember that, folks. No internet, no nothing. And they were writing stuff. These are just average citizens, average human beings. Oh my God, they were right on top of all of these clues, and they were connecting these different dots together into these very real shapes and forms. So could you comment on that?
Well, there's a lot of smart people, whether it be back in 1967, 68, or even today. But the thing is, the number of smart people, even though I said that there were many, they are a minority. And as you said, Charlie, back then, if you figured something out, your way of communicating it en masse was extremely limited. Yeah. So you either had to hope that something got published in a newspaper or something got published in a magazine, or there was no internet. But now, having said that, I also subscribe to the fact that I believe that there just was a better sense of common sense.
Yeah. Great
back
term.
back about 50, 60 years ago, because I remember growing up as a kid, you and I about the same age, and my family, my friends' families, the parents, um, there was a lot of common sense because you had to really work hard to make things work.
Yeah.
Back in those days, I mean, you didn't have all the luxuries and all the stuff, the technology that we have today, and so it was a strong moral fiber, that's for sure. That was the fabric of how society was and the culture was put together from a morality perspective. I believe was much, much stronger than it is today. And I just think people, I think they use their brains more. As an example, I remember in school when I was a kid growing up, going into elementary school and stuff, we were taught a lot of stuff that's not taught today. And even going back to the 1960s, the JFK assassination, Mark Lane, wrote that book,
yep.
Right? And so even right after the JFK assassination, the word was out that this thing was a massive conspiracy, and so there were definitely people that knew and were reading Mark Lane's work and getting into it, but we were hindered, or I should say, not we, because we were too young back then, but they were hindered by the fact that they didn't have the venues or the platforms to be able to get the message out. But I guess what I'm saying is if I go back 50, 60 years ago, there was more common sense. People used their reasoning and logic more so back then, generally speaking, than we do today. Because back then you had to think. Today, if somebody wants to look something up today, as an example, let's just start this way. If we go back to when you and I were kids and we had to go do some research and we had to go figure something out, we had to go pull out an encyclopedia, right? Or we had to go read books. Today, we have the lazy person's way of quote unquote researching. That's why Wikipedia was given to us, right? Wikipedia was given to the masses for the sole purpose of keeping people from digging deep.
Yep.
To make it real lazy, make it real simple, real quick. I can't tell you how many people I talk to on any kind of conspiracy type of thing. I try not to have too many of those conversations with people outside of people who are awake, but every once in a while you wind up having to do that. And their first inclination is to go to Wikipedia or to watch a YouTube video. That's how ridiculously dumbed down it has gotten. Now, back then, we didn't have those vehicles. So like I said, if you wanted to go find something out, I remember as a kid having to do research, and I had to go to the library.
Mm-hmm. I spent most of my formative years in the bowels of the library on microfiche, finding deep articles that were stored away on microfiche. You got to do the work.
Taking a look at old newspaper on microfiche, you're exactly right.
They can't hide that stuff. It's there, but if you don't search for it, you can't find it.
Right. And so today, nobody's going to the library. Nobody's digging that deep. Like I said, they're going to Wikipedia, they're going to YouTube, or worse, they're so apathetic, they just simply do not care. They don't care.
Yep.
So they're in the land of, la la land. They don't care.
Yeah, they really don't. And what you found, and this is another thing I wanted to bring up. Such a great point from your latest video on Paul Fall Six Toes on Sage Quay. Colleen and I, again, we watched it last night. And one of the things that you said, this is so important, folks. They can't hide what they put out there. It's like, if you want to know what really happened with JFK, November 22nd, 1963, just go back and listen to or read what the accounts were by the people who were really there and who were closest, or what they said happened. And you'll be able to piece together quite quickly a fairly accurate diagram of what went on. It's the same thing with 9/11. If you just go back and watch the actual news broadcasts themselves, these are all privately owned, completely controlled shill outfits, and they were giving away the clues of what really happened on 9/11 right then and there, but only in the first 6 to 8, 10 hours. And after that, all the mistakes were weeded out. And by the second day, it was all replaced. It was all replaced. And the new narrative was taking shape. Just, JFK, they're saying the weapon was a, Mannlicher Carcano, but the original reports that it was a German-made Mauser. And that the caliber, what was it? I think 7.63 caliber of the Mauser. And that they were even making reports on the first day, Cronkite even saying that the ballistics of the bullets found with JFK were matching up to this Mauser. And then in the second day, you can watch it. There's a tremendous documentary that exists, and there's no talking. The person who put it together doesn't have any agenda, didn't say anything. He just pieced together the news reports in the first 72 hours following the JFK assassination. It is brilliant. Evidence of Revision is the name of this podcast, and it's a must-have podcast. And without saying anything, the person who did this and put it together shows you what was said in the first 1 hour, and then what was said in the first 4 hours. The next 3 hours is different. Then what was said in the next 8 hours is powerfully different. And by the time you got to day 2, it is a whole nother fucking story.
Another example of what you were just talking about, Charlie, is I have the original news footage of what happened when the Oklahoma City bombing took place. And the newscast, because it was local news at the time, said that the bomb squads went in and there were 2 undetonated bombs inside the building.
Yep.
Inside the building. And as you said, just like with 9/11, after about a day of that, we can't have any more of that, right? So the controllers made sure that was completely scrubbed and erased, went into the memory hole, and then we got a whole different narrative. But I have that video. I kept it, and
I remember.
So maybe I'll post it. Maybe I'll put it on my blog, put it on Facebook so people can take a look at it. But the early reporting was that there were bombs inside the building. Now, it's not to say that the McVeigh truck bomb didn't go off, but the McVeigh bomb in the truck did not do the damage to that building because the building blew from the inside out.
It sure did. And I actually remember hearing those reports as well, Mike. And do you remember on 9/11, even Dan Rather, 4, 5, 6 hours after the event on 9/11, Dan Rather was going into great detail. It almost seems as if the core columns were cut in these buildings because of how they came down and how fast they came down. Let's scrub that out there, Dan. Don't say that anymore, buddy. That did not happen, Dan. Oh, right. Yeah, of course.
Well, I think a part of that, too, is what Mark Devlin, our mutual friend, refers to as revelation of the method. I mean, so sometimes I think it could be a slip of the tongue, and they say these things, and, like, oops, we got to remove that there. But I think many times, Charlie, these things are said because they're supposed to be said. It's part of the script. It's part of in Memoirs, in the Blue Book, they refer to it as the pyramid of power, the Illuminati. Respect what they refer to as free agency, but basically that means free will. Yeah. So they will float it out there. They will, they will plant the thought or the idea that, hey, this is what happened, wink, wink. And so if you grab onto it, good for you. But if you don't, oh, well. And that's where most people fall. Most people fall into the oh, well category. They don't grab onto the initial clues, hints that are put out there, and they grab onto the fictional account, which usually comes about, like you said, a day or two later, where it really starts to solidify.
Yeah, and then it's there forever in Wikipedia, because that's where the truth exists, in Wikipedia. It's all there for you. It's all been done. Yeah. So going back to, I was born in 1963, so I was pretty young back then, but I had 2 older sisters who were very much into the hippie movement and very much thankfully, into some really great music. And so at a very young age, I was it connected with me, just the movement and, you know, truth and peace and love. And remember, one of the things that they're hiding from you about the 60s, and this is really important for everyone to know, and why the 60s had to be hijacked and stopped, and you know, roll out Charlie Manson, dirty hippie, killing people, and then whoop, that's it. It's all over now. Is because what the hippies were doing were educating their own children at home. They were dropping out of cities. They were going to live together on farms. They were living in a communal, pastoral nature with Mother Nature. They're very connected to Mother Nature. They're very connected. And here's another little thing that I'll just throw there that all of my research shows me about the 60s. They were meditating like crazy. And when you meditate, you go into what's called God's world, the right hemisphere of your brain, where God exists within each one of us. So when you hear this current narrative, and of course, you'd be a kook or a nut not to know that the hippies was just about LSD and sex and maybe some dirty hair. Because if you watch a Hollywood movie, that's all they're going to tell you. But that's not the truth. What was going on with the hippies in the 60s was born out of the freaks in the 50s. And the freaks in the 50s said something is fucking wrong and we need to do something about this. And the freaks in the 50s, they went into libraries. Yeah, like Mike said, they went into libraries and they read books and they started writing books and they went into cafes and they began to have these little public forums again, and to talk about things. And this is what led to the movement of the 60s. And it's not sex. And there was certainly that aspect to it, the freeness. But of course, that's just the ignorant masses joining into it after a certain point, and looking for the free ride. But the heart of the hippie movement, man, that was meditation. And that was thinking. And so one of the great things on your podcast last night about the six toes of Fall or Paul, was that you were saying, and folks, remember, go back and look at these albums. The album covers and the album package is a huge set of clues for you that they can't erase. You have these firsthand documents. You know, you're right back at the Kennedy assassination with these documents. These are sacred. They always have been sacred. The record album, these packages have always been sacred to me, and I know they have been to you as well. I used to sleep with my LPs and my record albums all on top of me. They're so precious. And they've got the truth in plain sight on those covers. And that's where these Beatles fans and rock and roll fans and music fans were getting their information from the songs, from the lyrics, and from the corroborating clues on these albums and the album covers and the backs and the inside and the sleeves and all of these things. And man, Mike, they were figuring this stuff out, and it's impressive when I was going back through and looking at this. Very impressive.
That's exactly what happened. That's how a lot of people found the clues. And then somebody decided they were going to go play the record backwards. And
I know, it's brilliant.
And then they stumbled on to backmasking. So that one thing led to another. But it's quite interesting. You're right. I mean, it did heat up, especially in 1969, the whole rumor, and it's gone in peaks and valleys. It would get interest, and then it would just dip again, and then interest a little bit, and then it would dip again, and it really didn't pick up steam again until actually, I don't like saying this because people think I'm patting myself on the back, but when I did that show in September of 2016 with Sophia Smallstorm, which I did reluctantly, by the way, I really did not want to do a show on Paul is Dead.
Wow.
It was after I did that show, and I talked about the memoirs of Billy Shears, that the interest level peaked tremendously.
It did, Mike, and Colleen and I saw that show. I still remember that podcast very, very well, and it blew me away.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't apt to do that show. I don't know if you know the story, but what happened was I was talking to Sophia maybe early in the summer or whatever, and I said, "Hey, I bought this book, and it's called The Memoirs of Billy Shears," and I was just talking to her a little bit about it. And then she said, "Well, you should come on my show. We should do a podcast on it." And I said, "Well, I don't think I want to do that." And she says, "No, no, you really should. This is very interesting. People will find it of interest." And I thought, I don't know. I don't know if I want to do this. I said, first of all, the book is 666 pages. I'm about, halfway through it. So I have to finish the other 300 pages or so. And I don't know. I just didn't feel like a real push to go do it. And, and I just didn't say anything about it. And I thought, well, maybe she'll just forget. And, she didn't forget because, she has a memory like an elephant. And so finally, she convinced me to come on the show and talk about it. And it's really weird, Charlie, when I do look back, that show, September of 2016, which was 50 years, 50th anniversary of when biological Paul McCartney passed away. In fact, Paul died September 11th, 1966. I did that show on September 12th, 2016.
Wow.
50 years later. It's really weird,
Wow.
And it's after I did that show that things really started to pick up. And it's funny, now I go on YouTube and I take a look at, I type in, in a YouTube search, Paul is dead. And I cannot believe how many channels have jumped into this. And some of them are bigger channels, mainstream, who are trying to, quote unquote, debunk the conspiracy. But in order for these more mainstream channels to think about putting something out to debunk, it means that people are asking a lot of questions and it's starting to get traction. The Paul is dead theory is getting traction.
Exactly.
Right? That's the only time they come out, when they want to try to douse the fire. But anyway, so like I said, I hate saying that because it sounds like I'm patting myself on the back, but
no, but
it's what I observed.
Yeah, I observed it too in real time. So it's true, Mike. And it's really, really fascinating. And, when you go back into the music of the Beatles in terms of what you and Mark Devlin have powerfully laid out. And I know that this is, I think, the thing that people need to understand. This cannot be easy for any fan of the Beatles to do this, especially Mike Williams to do this. But, either you're going to lie to yourself or you're going to tell the truth. And the truth is that the Beatles were a contrivance. And what they grew into is open to conjecture. But and what they became after the band broke apart is open to conjecture. But they were contrived. And so what I wanted to do is get you to comment on this, because when you look at essentially they had so many albums and so many little EPs and stuff, but essentially the first four Beatles records into then the soundtrack for A Hard Day's Night and Help kind of culminates that first era of the Beatles, and that was I Want to Hold Your Hand and She Loves Me, Yeah, 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 and all of these sort of tin-plated songs. And then came Rubber Soul, and Rubber Soul is very different. And then came Revolver, and Revolver is very, very, very different even from Rubber Soul. Then came Sgt. Pepper's, and people, I think, say this, but they don't really understand what they're saying in terms of there was nothing ever like it before. Certainly, there were aspects to the engineering by Jeff Emmerich and George Martin, the production of the album that was groundbreaking in some ways. But really, really is what we're talking about is that it was the deep esoteric nature and the storytelling and the connectivity from beginning to end with that album that people weren't used to and was kind of groundbreaking. And that was a radical departure from Rubber Soul and Revolver. And then what you see is that after Sgt. Pepper's, it all kind of starts to fall apart for them. And I'm going to get your thoughts. These are just my thoughts, but it starts to fall apart because the Magical Mystery Tour is a sad attempt at trying to recapture or maybe push along what was being what was being developed in Sgt. Pepper's. And then, as I discussed at the beginning, came the White Album. And if there's a Beatles album to really, 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 really explore esoterically, it's the White Album, because whatever it was contractually or however it played out, you had George wanting to leave and very much convinced that if he was going to get 1 or 2 tracks or 3 tracks on an album, he was going to say what he was going to say. And so you started to get these songs from George that were very from the heart of George. And with John, I think John recognized that if he was going to say what he wanted to say, he had to really encode a lot of the things that he had to live through. And so you have these deeply, like Glass Onion, that is, wow, there's a ton of truth about the Beatles, about Tavistock, about organized society in that song alone. But that whole album, Happiness, is a warm gun. Ooh, it really signified that the Beatles were coming apart at the seams. Yellow Submarine, ridiculous. And then the Rooftop fiasco with Fall leading them on the rooftop with Let It Be, and a lot of older tracks finding their way onto that album as well. And it was just kind of a mess from beginning to end. And then the olive branch to leave this on good terms, or whatever it was, came in many regards a masterpiece with Abbey Road. But holy cow, what a journey. So let me get your thoughts on all of that.
Well, I think the first thing we should probably call out is each one of the Beatles albums was impeccably recorded and produced. So this is something that I always found amazing. So an enormous amount of time and effort was undertaken to make sure that their recordings were impeccable. So we find that with all of the recordings. I mean, we can take a look at, as an example, the Rolling Stones and their recordings weren't as well produced. I mean, many times we'll hear analog hiss on their songs. You very rarely, if ever, heard that on any of the Beatles tracks. An enormous amount of attention was focused on the Beatles recordings. So I wanted just to call that out, because that's a clear sign that there was going to be a much longer shelf life, and that the Beatles were very special and very important to Tavistock. And you were right, Charlie, that the Beatles were a project, and there is nothing organic about them at all. Phase 1 of the Beatles was when they were in Hamburg, playing at the Cavern Club back in England. That's the Stu Sutcliffe, Pete Best era.
Yep.
Phase 2 was when Ringo joined the band, and Phase 2 was all about making records and touring. And Phase 3 was the Billy period, and that was 1967, and that was studio work. So there was 3 phases to the Beatles. I agree with you that there was an evolution that took place with the records as far as the songs that were on them and the songwriting. And the reason why I've explained this, my theory, I've explained on another show that when I say they, I mean Tavistock and those that were involved in the Beatles project, they had to take it very methodically and incrementally. In other words, they just couldn't hit us with Sgt. Pepper in 1963, right? It just wouldn't have went anywhere. So what they had to do is they had to move it along. So we had, the first album was Please Please Me, and then it was in the second album was With the Beatles, and we had A Hard Day's Night. Then we had Beatles for Sale, which is my least popular or favorite Beatle album, but still some great songs there. And then we went to Help, Rubber Soul. Then we went to Revolver, Sgt. Pepper, and so on. So what we saw was this incremental process of introducing the music, with each album getting more and more complex and driving the direction of pop music in a different direction. Yeah. So we start with Please Please Me, boy band, lots of cover tunes and so on. And you're right, by the time we got to Rubber Soul, and that's only the 6th album, by the way. So from Please Please Me to Rubber Soul, 6 LPs, this band is a very, very different band where the songwriting matured tremendously. The production value, we start to get the full breadth of orchestration, all of that. And then when Revolver hits, which, by the way, I believe to be the best Beatle album, from my perspective, the best one they ever did was Revolver. We really, really get an incredible set of songs, an incredible album in Revolver. And then, of course, Revolver then is segueing into the psychedelic era by having the last song on the album is Tomorrow Never Knows.
That's right.
Right? Tomorrow Never Knows. Think about that, folks. And the advent of Billy coming along. Tomorrow Never Knows. And then, boom, we get hit with Sgt. Pepper, which at the time when it came out, it upstaged the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds, if you remember.
Yeah.
And so Pepper was the introduction into the psychedelic era. This was music that was just nobody could fathom this. It was amazing. And it was Billy's masterpiece. It was his record. He drove it. He was the leader. The other Beatles were more in a supporting cast role, even though, John obviously wrote some great songs for it. And George had Within You, Without You. But at the end of the day, the whole album, from cradle to grave, beginning to end, was Billy.
And if anyone wants to try and dispute that, I'll just quickly say this. All you have to do is just go right back to the horse's mouth. Just listen or read what John Lennon himself said.
That's right.
Follow up to that album, and it bears out 100% exactly what Mike just said.
That's right. And it was Billy's baby. And like you just said, Charlie, John says, basically Paul pulled everybody together, or Billy pulled everybody together and said, we're going to do this. And so after that, you're right, Magical Mystery Tour, which was released as EPs in the UK, were remnants of Sgt. Pepper. Still some great, great songs there. I mean, Magical Mystery Tour itself, we have Strawberry Fields Forever, Penny Lane, and so on. All You Need Is Love was on Magical Mystery Tour. But then it starts to kind of wind down a little bit, and we get into, then we had Yellow Submarine, but then we hit the White Album. And the White Album, I have always said, was 4 guys doing solo work. Okay. And they decided that they were going to take their solo efforts and put it on one album under the umbrella of the Beatles. And it's very obvious that they each went off in their own direction and wrote their own songs. And they collaborated to a degree. It wasn't like the old McCartney-Lennon days before Pepper. They basically were 4 musicians that came in, and, where John needed bass playing, Billy played bass, where Billy needed whatever from John would contribute, and so on. But that's really what it was. The White Album is a very interesting album because, for me, I'm going to give you my impressions when I listen to the White Album. First of all, I love it. I think the music is very eclectic. I love the assortment of music, but it also has a dark underbelly to it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something dark about the White Album. And I don't mean dark in an evil way. It just does not have that lightheartedness of the albums that came before it.
Agree,
and
100%.
Yeah, and I felt what we're getting here now is we're starting to get far more introspective. The Beatles themselves, the band, far more invested in what they believe, what they're feeling, what they want to talk about. And so that's what we got with the White Album. And, then the Let It Be sessions actually took place before Abbey Road. It was a mess. I mean, still some great songs that, came off of Let It Be. Obviously, we had the song Let It Be. We had The Long and Winding Road for You, Blue, Get Back. That was all on Let It Be. But Let It Be was, it wasn't stitched together. You could tell that the stitching was still very loose, right? Like wearing a sweater where some of the threads are starting to come apart. And then one last hurrah when they got back into the studio to do Abbey Road, which I consider to be their second best album. I think Pepper is third on my list. I love Sgt. Pepper because I love psychedelic music. I love Jimi Hendrix and so on. But when I take a step back and I listen to the actual craftsmanship of the songs, and from beginning to end, the quality of the songs, Revolver and Abbey Road, 1 and 2 for me. But, we take a look at Abbey Road, they are, again, the Beatles are communicating to us what's going on here, because the first song is Come Together, and the last song is The End. All right. And so that pretty much, told us what was going on. Coming together, and this is it. We're done. And Abbey Road indeed was their last album, even though it was the last album, right? Because Let It Be was recorded before.
Yeah, exactly. Released after, but no. Let It Be, the Rooftop Fiasco was before. This was their swan song, and it was constructed as that from beginning to end. And a quick point I want to interject and get your thoughts on as well is Billy could not have achieved what he achieved, and you got to tip your hat to Billy. And this guy really knows music, unlike from a very core elemental level versus then Lennon or even George. But he needed a compatriot, and the compatriot in that band all along, for whom was really behind the Beatles and their music, was George Martin. I don't care how people want to respond to that. It's the truth. George Martin was a tremendously intelligent individual and an outstanding producer, probably the best producer of pop music. Although if he'd have taken his talents to other genres, he probably would have been best as well. He was a tremendous record producer, but there is a controlling aspect to that band from beginning to end, and the only real guiding hand from beginning to end was George Martin. And when Billy came into this whole vehicle, he got away with what he did in terms of control because of George Martin, because of that allegiance and alliance. And that's what I get, that you saw and I see on Abbey Road as well, is maybe Billy not being so domineering because the others are rebelling against it. So then George stepped up and made sure that the deep esoteric was achieved on Abbey Road.
Yeah, there is no question that George Martin, his role was, it cannot be overstated. In fact, I have gone as far to say that George Martin was responsible for actually shaping and songsmithing, especially in the early days. I believe George Martin, one of his responsibilities was when a song came in, and by the way, I don't believe the early Beatles wrote all of their songs. I believe that they wrote songs, but I also believe that there were professionals, uncredited, that had songs that they wound up recording that were credited to Lennon and McCartney. And I know it's going to be a lot of people are going to be very irate with me for saying that, but I believe one of the main cogs was George Martin. So in other words, he made sure that those songs were structured properly. He made sure that they were ready for prime time. He made sure they had the right stuff for pop music, for the pop culture. This is what he did. And he was a phenomenal producer. He was a phenomenal musician.
He really
and
was.
So he was. And by the way, he and Billy bonded, okay? Because Billy himself is no slouch when he's in the studio.
No,
he
isn't. He understands music at an elemental level, and that's that bond. Whereas with Martin, must have been pulling his hair out with original Paul and John because of their lack of technical understanding and expertise, even just with the playing of their instruments. And
right.
Martin was just a precisionist with all of his playing. Just
As was Billy.
As was Billy. And you really saw that. So there's a real bond. And there's also a bond because they were both read into all of this by the same group of people. You know, the Aleister Crowley group that was reading all of these celebrities into the deep esoteric. And I just got to interject because I feel the exact same way. It was one of the things I've got down here and we're going to discuss and I've got a load of examples to show on, in particular on Rubber Soul and Revolver, less with Revolver, more so with Rubber Soul, and this transition as serious songwriters and the inconsistency. And I know that I'm not surprised that you said that, because I was going to say in my show notes I've got here that Mike will understand this, will get this, because you are a gifted songwriter in your own right. So you will know. And that with songwriting, we're all very self-conscious. And when you write a good song, you kind of tend to stay there simply because you want all of your songs to, especially in the beginning, you want your songs to be well received. And if you've done something right, you want to replicate what you did right at the beginning. And there are massive inconsistencies with songs that are attributed, especially to biological Paul, and with Lennon as well, but especially biological Paul. There are wildly inconsistencies with his songs until such time that Billy came in, and then you could just see this deep understanding of music and a real consistency with his music. And so there is that inconsistency. And the other thing that I just want to say, that what Mike was saying about that I think that George Martin was really the controlling hand in the shaping of these songs. Yes, and this is 100% provable, because all you have to do, and they put this out, this is all out there by any of the re-release of the Beatles albums, and they give you all of the demos. You listen to the demos to these songs, and then the finished versions of these songs, folks, I'm talking light years away. And just as someone who's dabbled in songwriting, I can tell you, you don't get there. And remember, these are albums that are being produced every 3 months. It's not like Steely Dan taking a year and a half or 3 years to do an album. These are albums that are being churned out every 3 months. And so within 6 weeks, you don't get a songwriter who goes from the demos that I heard to that finished product. You don't. We don't make leaps in our songwriting abilities that quickly. So somebody was controlling it. And as I say, 100% proof to what you said, Mike. Everything that you said is bang on. And it's so easy to prove. So back to you.
Yeah, I mean, if we just take a look at the songs that were on Please Me, their first album, it came out in March 22nd, 1963. And then you take a look at the songwriting on Revolver, or the album before that, Rubber Soul. That progress in songwriting, that maturity took place in 3 years.
Yeah.
Okay. You have to question that. Now, I could see if somebody said, okay, well, 10 years later, 3 years. So on Please Me, I'll read some of the songs off here. I have it here. So I Saw Her Standing There, Misery, Anna, Chains, Boys, Ask Me Why, Please Me, Love Me Do, P.S. I Love You. Okay. So that was the caliber of songs that the Beatles were pumping out and playing back in 1963. And then, fast forward 3 years later, we have Taxman, Eleanor Rigby, I'm Only Sleeping, Love You Too, Here, There, and Everywhere, Yellow Submarine, She Said, Good Day Sunshine, For No One, Got to Get You Back Into My Life, Tomorrow Never Knows. I mean, these songs are light years from a songwriting ability and perspective away or ahead of what was on Please Me, or even the second album, which is with the Beatles. I'm talking about the UK releases because those are the official releases. Yeah. So we have to question it. We have to question it. We would be remiss if we didn't look at this and say, well, how did that happen? How did that happen? And so they had to have received help. Now, was it just George Martin? I'll bet my bottom dollar George Martin was front and center, but I'm going to bet that there were others that were there helping them along, because you have to remember the Beatles were a Tavistock project, a massive social engineering initiative. There was no way they were going to invest the time and money in this creation, in this Beatles project, and have it fail. No way. So every dollar was spent, every resource was pulled into the inner circle to make sure that this was going to happen. And it did, and so we have to question it, Charlie. We have to. Otherwise, like I said, we would be irresponsible if we're trying to be objective with this. And I know you and I are trying to be objective, to not at least ask the question, did they or did they not receive help? And I'll take it a step further. Did the original four from 63 to 66 write all of that music? And, I'm leaning toward perhaps not. Not saying they didn't write songs, but are there songs that I believe that were crafted and handed over to them to play? I think that's very possible.
I think it's far beyond possible. I think it's an absolute. And one of the things that I did, just sort of thinking this through, is I looked at some of the live clips or videos for some of the songs, especially from Rubber Soul and Revolver. And when you watch, and then going back with their earlier songs, when you watch in particular Lennon, and he's playing a song that clearly he did not write, even ones that are credited to him that he wrote, he looks and he acts, even if he's lip syncing to these songs, he is a different person. And then when you see John Lennon playing a song, even if he's just lip syncing it, that a song that I'm certain that he wrote, because it's consistent with it. Lennon was a great songwriter, but Lennon, he wrote from a very central core. There's a lot of consistency in the songwriting of John Lennon. You can tell a John Lennon crafted song. You really can, because I think it comes from a similar place musically inside of him. And when you watch the visual clues from John Lennon, he's a different person. When he was playing live songs that he wrote, he was really, it wasn't this big smile on his face and the bobbing thigh to thigh and whatnot. And he was really serious. He was really sincere. And then you look at certain songs that he's even accredited with writing, and he's not the same. So to me, there's just absolutely no question. And as you say, and what's important for people to know, this is the first massive contrivance against all of society, and there was nothing left to chance. That's why George Martin was, you could maybe say in some aspects from his classical background, slumming it in pop music. Yeah, they weren't leaving anything to chance here, Mike.
No, in fact, I don't even believe the whole story where they were turned down by Decca Records. I believe that's a total fabrication. They were always earmarked for EMI. EMI is part of the British military industrial complex, had been for decades, many, many, many years. And so the Beatles were earmarked for EMI. They were earmarked to end up with George Martin and with Brian Epstein being the quote unquote manager. And also, Charlie, I've said this on Mark's show. I believe the whole story that we're given about the Beatles when they were younger lads, as working class, lads in Liverpool, and their family histories, I believe that's completely contrived as well. Not saying there aren't aspects of it that are true, but I believe we are fed a massive story. It's the same people that gave us the Beatles Project, this massive social engineering initiative, are the same people that wrote the books. They're the same people that gave you the websites. They're the same people that published the news articles and the magazine articles and the fan magazines and so on. So the whole thing was manufactured and contrived from the very, very beginning, from a very, very early age with these Beatles. I believe that it's very possible that biological Paul McCartney and most likely John Lennon too were in mind control programs. And so going back to when they were kids, young teens, maybe even before that, preteen. This is something that I'm going to look at some more, even though I said that I'm not going to have an ongoing Paul is dead research program anymore. But it is something that interests me because both McCartney and Lennon, their family histories are very sketchy. We have Lennon, who really had no father. And then we had Paul McCartney, who lost his mother at an early age. His father has a very spotty record, very spotty as with regard to, who was he? Yep. What did he do? What was his job, really? And then, he spends time with the Ashers. And Dr. Asher, of course, is tied into the whole business of psychiatry.
And then mysteriously killing himself. There's you go into the Ashers, and anyone connected with them is mysteriously killing themselves later.
Yeah, they said he committed suicide. He was down in his basement for a week. I mean, who did that investigation? You didn't find the guy in his own basement for a week dead. So so the whole thing it smells fishy, to say the least. And so there's a lot to this story, Charlie. You and I are just touching the tip of the iceberg. And again, a lot of folks who love the Beatles, they don't want to hear this. But hey, like we said earlier in the show, there are those that possess the key for knowledge and those that do not. So you're either going to seek the truth or you're going to sit fat, dumb, and happy and enjoy the illusion.
Wow, brilliantly said. And again, from someone who is a gifted musician and songwriter, very powerful. And then from someone who grew up at a very young age, loving the music of the Beatles and connected to them powerfully. Very, very powerful words, Mike. And I just agree 100% with it. We've really, especially in this last hour, we really covered a ton of stuff. Let me ask you for your thoughts now, coming full circle, and all that you've learned, all that you've done, how much you've awoken to all of this. Where do the Beatles sit? The music of the Beatles, where does that rest inside of you, and how do you feel about all of this?
I still enjoy the music. I can enjoy the craftsmanship of the music. It's some of the best, if not the best, pop music ever written. But I have to say that my overall view and feeling of the Beatles is tainted and tarnished, because I bought into the fairy tale. The storyline that was given to us that these were just, four working class lads from Liverpool who happened to make it big because some, intrepid small record store owner found them and, and brought them along. Right. I mean, I bought into all that,
Me too.
And bought into the fact that, if you work hard enough and, you can have all this fame and fortune. I mean, I tried doing that. I had a band, and then I was going solo, and I was trying to get my music published and all that stuff back in the, the late 70s and into the 1980s, only to find that it's impossible. It's impossible. So you have to be connected. You have to have connections to make it into the music and entertainment business. It's completely controlled, folks. Completely controlled. There is no organic. The Beatles were never organic. Forget it. They were not. And so, so now when I look back at it, Charlie, is a little bit of sadness in my heart, to be honest with you, because, they meant so much to me growing up. I worshiped the Beatles. I mean, you could see my room here, and you could see all the instruments and everything else. And this is all because of the Beatles. I learned to play music. I learned to play guitar. I learned to write music and record because of the Beatles. And so I'll always have that aspect, which I can appreciate. But the overall the the aura that the Beatles used to radiate from me is no longer there. I just see them now as a contrived, manufactured entity that produced some very, very fine music, but they didn't do it naturally and they didn't do it organically, that there was this huge, huge machine behind them. And that, quite honestly, they could have taken you and I and two other guys and probably could have done the exact same thing with four different people based upon the resources, the money, and the talent that was, and the drive that was behind the formulation of this psychological operation known as the Beatles. So, I mean, a little long-winded there, but yeah,
No,
a little
not
bit
at
of
all.
sadness in my heart because of, how it all kind of panned out.
Okay, so then that, if you don't mind, that leads me into a couple of questions that are very near and dear to my heart. And that is, after the breakup of the Beatles, you have the three principles, all four principles, going along. And again, it's interesting that Paul and Ringo were doing albums and songs that were, I mean, wow. Paul's solo stuff is such a massive departure in terms of themology from some of the deeper stuff that he was accredited to doing with the Beatles. So they took a turn in one direction, and then you had Harrison and Lennon taking a very powerful turn in another direction. So I think my thoughts about George Harrison and John Lennon's solo careers and their solo records. Am I off track there with the two of them being authentic and trying to get out as much truths about the band and some higher truths about society and about humanity? Or are you thinking that even their solo stuff, those two, was as controlled and contrived as their days in the Beatles?
I do believe that John and George started to walk off the reservation. And we can only, we need to look at John's song, How Do You Sleep, which completely encapsulates the whole Paul is dead conspiracy. I mean, John is telling us flat out what was going on. And, and John, yeah, he had gotten fed up. In fact, I reread the Playboy interview that he did back in 1980 before he passed away.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And in that interview, John says 2 or 3 times that, back in the day, we were craftsmen, which is code for we were doing Masonic work. Freemasons is what he was saying. And then you can just see that, at least I saw that John just, I mean, he got away from the high production value stuff. I mean, we see that with his first album with the Plastic Ono Band, right? He kept it very raw. I mean, he did that intentionally. He did that to poke Billy in the eye because Billy was into all of this production and, really glossing it up. And John was like, fuck that. I'm not doing that anymore.
Yep.
And so I do see John, like I said, walking out of the room. He did have inclinations to New World Order mentality. We can see that with the song Imagine as an example, which is really an anthem for one world government and, one world religion. But, be that as it may, I mean, if that's what he believed, that's what he believed. But I saw him being more of his own person. George, the same thing. I saw George going out, doing his thing. I always loved George Harrison's guitar playing. I always felt George was genuine. We can also see during the 1980s that there was no love lost between George and Billy.
Oof.
We have lots of interviews where we can see where he's taken swipes at him.
Venom.
Yeah, I mean, really did not see eye to eye, did not get along. That got better in the 90s when they got back together to put Anthology back together. I shouldn't say back together, but to put the Anthology album together. But during the 1980s, I mean, there wasn't a lot of love lost between George and Billy. So, on the other hand, Billy was still doing he was still doing the mainstream pop music bit, right?
Yep.
He was still doing that. So he was keeping true to staying on that road. It's funny though. I did read an interview going back many, many years ago where he had said that he lamented many times about why it is that his solo music never met the level of his Beatle music. He felt that his Wings and solo stuff fell below the quality and I guess the greatness of the Beatle music. And some of that could be attributed to, I guess, because he didn't have the three other guys there, maybe. Or we can also say that perhaps it was because at that point when he had hit his solo career, he also didn't have the mainstay of that Tavistock machine behind him like it existed during the Beatle era. I'm not saying it wasn't there. I'm just saying when it was the Beatles, it was a whole different story. Even Ringo, right? Ringo was doing a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of acting. His albums weren't very good. I mean, he did the 1973 album, Ringo, where the song I'm the Greatest is on it. And that's a song where he, John, and George are on it. And they're singing about Bill.
Yep.
Right? Billy, because Billy's all into the occult, into the esoteric and mysticism. At the very end of that song, Ringo sings, I'm the greatest in this world, the next world, in any world. And they're talking about Billy's whole deal where he's into the esoteric, into Thelema and into mysticism. That's, that was a reference to that. But I mean, beyond the 1973 album, most of Ringo's stuff was not very noteworthy. And John had moments where, his albums really didn't cut it. I really enjoyed Walls and Bridges. I thought that was an excellent album. It was very introspective that John did. And, but other than that, I mean, a lot of John's stuff was so-so. I can't say all of it was great. And probably if John were alive today, he would tell you that a lot of that stuff wasn't so great. What was the name of that album? 2 albums set sometime in New York City?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, that was horrible. In fact, it was so bad, and John admitted that it was bad, that the reviews trashed it so badly that it rattled him. And it's when John actually, at that point, moved away from the Jerry Rubins of the world and decided that he was going to put a lot of distance between him and the group that he was hanging around with, who were basically utilizing him. They were leveraging him because of his fame and fortune for the counterculture movement at the time, anti-war movement and so on. But John walked away from it, and and when he did, his songwriting and his albums got better.
Yeah, and it's wonderful that he came back so strong with Double Fantasy and especially the message on Double Fantasy. And I think what you also kind of saw with both Ringo and John, just my thought, was a reconnection with George, seeing what George was doing and what George had always done, which was much more independent. He was completely, in relation to the others, much more independent and a free spirit than they were. And I think that's why both of them in the mid 70s really kind of reached out more in a grassroots nature back to George, in the way that George was making his records, which is from home and with a family. George, you see that a lot with people who have been in the so-called Illuminati, or have been within the system, the machine, and then they're spit out of the machine. What they tend to do is they tend to surround themselves with family, and these are producers or directors and writers, whatever, actors or musicians, and you surround themselves with the same crew, close people that you trust, close to home, and then you build these new projects with this trusted group as almost like a defense mechanism, creating your own family. And
well, he did that with the Traveling Wilburys, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That is, and I think that's also why you look at all these relationships with George. George was reaching out to people that I think the system, well, like you said, it's this is ownership. This is the music industry, and this is all about music ownership of the industry. So don't mistake that ever. This is playing by their rules. It's an industry,
right?
And I think that's why George reached out to Dylan, because I think he saw within Dylan somebody that had been used heavy and hard. And I think that's why George was so persistent in his attempts to befriend Dylan, which eventually worked. And reclaiming Roy Orbison, which was beautiful because that happened, not that long before Roy transitioned. So that was beautiful. And reaching out to Tom Petty, I think he saw talented people. I think he was attracted to gifted people, and I think George tried to help these people find independence and find their real freedom, which of course is within, which is through meditation, which is in the right hemisphere of our brains. And a lot of these people that George befriended, and like you said, in all different walks of life, they all talked about that privately. They talk about the influence that George had on them to change how they were living their lives. And in every case, they're all talking about this less reliance upon the system, more independence, more self-reliance, and more meditation, more going within and connecting back to the essence of things, which is what, I think we found in the music. And that's what I think you were finding with Lennon and Harrison, and as best they could, trying to distance themselves from what they'd been in and try to reveal what they could, both from a down the rabbit hole perspective about society and then a higher truth perspective about who we are as human beings. And I think in many instances they succeeded, and then there, like you said, there's some failures along the way. But what you got with Harrison and Lennon, in my opinion, after the breakup of the Beatles was some really rougher but very authentic music. What you got from Billy on those Wings albums following is I see it as really slick production, and way too much emphasis upon the production and the arrangement of the songs versus then the heart and soul of the songwriting.
Yeah, what took off of Billy was Band on the Run, and then also his Wings Over America live album, which was a great live album.
It is.
Looking back at it, that was the turnkey moment in which Billy, he took off again. They reinstalled the rockets on his feet, and he took off. Talking about Ringo for a second, though, we should really point out that Ringo took a couple of swipes at him too. So in the song "I'm the Greatest," one of the lyrics is "All I want to do is boogaloo," and what a lot of people don't know is they used to call Billy Boogaloo because he liked boogaloo music, and which is a form of Latin music, right? And so then Ringo came out with the song "Back Off Boogaloo," and on the cover of that 45, you'll see that it's Frankenstein. And so what he's depicting there is Billy, because Billy went through the transformation with the surgeries and the fillers and the latex and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's what he's depicting there. And read the lyrics to "Back Off Boogaloo," folks. Read it. I mean, you can clearly see now that I'm telling you, he's talking about Billy, and that was his nickname. That's one of the little terms of endearment that they had for Billy when he was with the Beatles, Boogaloo.
Yeah, that is an excellent pickup, Mike. Wow, that is, that's awesome.
That's probably one of the reasons why, it was one point when Billy wouldn't have Ringo play with him. I remember reading one interview where Ringo was lamenting about, I don't know why he doesn't call me, and get together and record a couple of songs. I'm thinking, well, maybe it's because You took a couple of swipes at him there, big guy, you know. So in any case, but nothing was as bad and in our face as John's "How Do You Sleep?" Nothing.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's true. And again, there's a lot of connection to George with that song and those early albums by John, almost just helping him with the strength and courage that's needed, to move over to New York City, make that transition, and then start taking swipes. Because that's the thing with George Harrison. Those swipes were apparent and bloody right from the beginning, right from the get-go with George. And I think that Ringo and John got a lot of strength from George having that conviction to sort of tell it like it is. Again, that's just my opinion. That's how I see it. Now, what I wanted to end on here was what do we, and I've heard you talk about this, it's brilliant. What do we take from this experience? And I called it earlier the Beatles saga, and it really is. So in your own words, what do we take from all of this? Does this lead us to Mark Devlin's live talks, presentations about be your own hero? What are your thoughts to close all of this in terms of the lesson we're learning about this incredible saga of the Beatles music?
Well, that the world is an illusion, that you shouldn't have idols, you shouldn't be worshiping. And that's exactly what happens. You know, we put rock stars and entertainers and celebrities on pedestals, and then you worship them. You worship them by spending money to buy their products, to buy their CDs, to go see their movies, and so on. So really, that's a part of your energy, right? Because you have to go work to go make the money, and then you're taking your energy in the form of money, and you're giving it over to them. It's also where you're putting your thoughts. It's where you're putting your consciousness. And so it's idol worship. And so what we're getting from the Beatles is we're breaking down and tearing down one of the largest worshiping institutions of all time by the population, right? Millions of people worship and have the Beatles on a pedestal. And by taking it down, by tearing it down, it's a good thing. It's a good thing because we now see, for folks that have eyes to see and ears to hear, that it's all fabricated. It's not real. The Beatles story that you were told is not real. And by digging into this conspiracy, Charlie, a lot of people will say, well, who cares? It's just a musician. Why do we care about this? I even have people in the truth community who think that I'm wasting my time on this and I should be talking about something that they think is important, right? But I have to correct them all the time. I said, look, this conspiracy teaches you about the pyramid of power.
Yep.
It teaches you about Luciferianism. It teaches you about the occult. It teaches you about mysticism. It teaches you about Tavistock. It teaches you about social engineering. It teaches you about magic, Crowley. I mean, I go on and on and on. It teaches you how a massive psychological operation was pulled off from beginning to end. Doubles, lookalikes, right? So when we break it down that way, what other conspiracy does that for us? I mean, we could talk about geoengineering till the cows come home.
Yeah.
And what are you going to get out of it? You're going to talk about barium, strontium, and aluminum. That's going to be, the mantra. Even the flat earth, people will invest themselves in the flat earth, and it's all about they're hiding God. It's flat. There's a dome. Okay. What do we have after that? I mean, I've got that part now. So, what's the forward progress on this thing? So when we talk about McCartney and the Beatles, we're really, really digging into the bowels of how this reality works. That is the takeaway from this. And that's the beautiful part about what Billy gave us in the book, The Memoirs of Billy Shears. Whether you love him
or hate him or you're indifferent, set that aside. He's allowing us to take a peek behind the curtain. He's bringing us in to a certain degree into the inner circle to help us understand how it works and why it's doing what it's doing. And that's why it's such a powerful area of research to look into. But in order to do it, you have to drop the subjectivity. You have to drop your belief systems. And you have to get to the point where you are incredibly objective. Forget about all the stuff you read about the Beatles. Forget about this song, that song. Forget all that stuff. And just focus on what it's really all about. And once you do that, then you can take that knowledge and that wisdom and you can extrapolate it and you can apply it to all other conspiracies. Because now you have an understanding of how this machine works, how it does these things, and why it does these things. What are they doing? Oh, they're mind controlling the masses. They're social engineering. Why are they doing it? Why? Okay. So, and the thing is, I've covered this in other shows, and I know we're running low on time here, but what's going on here is the controllers are implementing Luciferianism, and it's well on its way. So I put a video up called Paulism, the cult of Paulism, which is Luciferianism. And that's what the Beatles are all about. In the book, the Memoirs of Billy Shears, they talk about Paulism. Paulism is a form of Luciferianism, Satanism. And so if some people don't like Luciferianism and they don't like Satanism, we can call it the cult of Dionysus. This is what's being implemented. This is the road that they have humanity on. And if you read the book, you'll have an understanding of this. This is why when people say the book is fiction, it's this, it's that, and they have, first of all, if it's people who are saying that haven't read the book, and if they claim they haven't read the book, they have read the book, then they haven't read it correctly. They haven't read the encoding. They haven't broken it down. They're not utilizing their critical thinking faculties to really understand what's being told. So that's why this is important, Charlie, because you really get a pretty good understanding of what it is that's being put in play. And what's being put in play, I can't even say it's being put in play, it has been put in play. And we are well on our way to a world of Luciferianism and the cult of Dionysus.
And if you look at the music industry, it's pathetic to even. It is an industry, and that's why it's called music industry. But if you compare it to what it was, and if you take a look at what existed from, say, 65 to, I always say, about 82. 82 was that last incredible year of just great album after great album after great album coming out. And you look at it now, it is a reflection of what's in the songs of Billy Shears. It is a reflection in the personal beliefs and the lifestyle and all of the nonsense and chaos that's gone on in and around this construct of Paul McCartney. That's why this is important. That's why this is huge, because that's what we're living, folks. And we have been put, and things weren't great in the 60s. Hey, that's why there was a cultural revolution going on. And yet, who in their right mind wouldn't say, hey, I'd give it all up if we could just get back to the good old days of the 60s. We have been pushed so far from being what we are, which is human beings, into just huddled cattle, huddled sheep in the middle of these great pens known as cities. And what's being spewed to us is the realm of Billy Shears, is the realm of what is known as the Paul McCartney construct. And so knowing this, understanding this is massive, because it is what you are living today. And
exactly right.
Yeah, what I find so amazing is at the core of many of the songs, especially George and to a large extent John as well, at the core of those songs was the alternative. And you look at after on John's first solo album, Plastigono Band, and after the track God, what does John say? I don't believe in. Who doesn't he believe in? The main principal names of this organized society, including Jesus Christ, which there never was. There never was a guy named Jesus running around the Holy Land 2,000 years ago. And that takes a lot of courage. And so what does John say? I believe in myself and Yoko. And
he said, I don't believe in Beatles.
And that's right. On the list was, I don't believe in Beatles. And he mentioned Hitler as well. And what we've been taught is, we're not going to get into this, but what we've been taught about the Second World War, holy fuck, folks, it is virtually upside down from what really happened. So this is why Mike's work is so important. And this is why I say, it's why the tribute show, and this is why I say we're all very fortunate that Mike Williams and his channel, The Sage of Quay, has been the steward of this investigation, because this is serious and this is important, and it could have been turned into a shit show, and it hasn't been, because Mike has been kind of, the steward of this investigation, and has created a quorum around this research that is very serious. And again, your connection, not friendship in any way, but just your connection with Tom Uharriet bears that out as well. Tom knows that you're a serious guy, an authentic person, and that you're doing the right things and you're asking the right questions. And that's what Mike has said again and again in this podcast today, folks, is that if you don't start thinking for you, somebody else will always be there to do it for you. That's what this is all about. If you don't think for you, someone else will. And like Mike said, that's a choice. That's not forced at gunpoint to do anything. That's a choice.
That's right, Charlie.
And let me just, I want to read one quote here, which will tie in everything that you were saying, by Timothy Leary.
Good old Mr. Leary.
Yes. And right after the release of the White Album, Timothy Leary said, the wisest, holiest, most effective avatars that the human race has ever produced. Holy fuck.
Yep. Timothy Leary knew, obviously, what the Beatles were all about. He knew the agenda that they were pushing. Yeah, I've actually seen that quote before, Charlie. So when you started reading it, I kind of chuckled a little bit. I thought I know exactly where he's going with it. Biological Paul McCartney is a Christ figure. He's a graven image. So think of it in these terms. I said before that it's the cult of Paulism, which is a form of Luciferianism. Paul died, and he was resurrected. He was resurrected via Billy Shears. So he's a Christ figure. And so that's what Timothy Leary knew, and that's what I was alluding to, that the Beatles are a spiritual movement, along with being a movement that was involved in changing the society from the form of social engineering. But they were also a spiritual movement. And that spiritual movement was a movement of getting away from traditional values, breaking the bonds of the old ways of doing things, and moving into a more, don't even want to say more, moving into a Luciferian age. an age where it's an age of leveraging your will.
Yep.
So it's very Crowley-like, right? It's thelema. So that is what Timothy Leary was alluding to.
Yeah, I agree. And when you look in, do a little research on Leary. Leary said it himself. And so did Richard Alpert as well. A rammed ass. They both admitted that they were agents of the CIA, and the ties to Tavistock, especially with Leary, are huge. So to get this quote at the height of the change in the hippie movement, which is after the White Album signaled this massive change in public perception about the hippies, because the White, like you said, there's something darker about the White Album. Yeah, there's supposed to. This is why Charlie Manson is writing the lyrics predominantly of Paul McCartney on supposedly on these scenes of sacrificial murders. This is what it's all about. It's designed to darken the hippie movement and then to kill it. And Charlie Manson is just another crisis actor that came along, that was offered up and played his role to perfection, so that they could kill this hippie movement once and for all. And again, so that's Timothy Leary. His partner Richard Alpert, who became this, moved to Tibet and became a Buddhist monk and changed his name to Ram Dass. And wow, yeah. These players. Hey, Mike.
Yeah, back to Eastern religion, which is where the White Album was written, back in India. So very interesting, Charlie. It was a great discussion. It was very freewheeling, and we covered a lot of ground.
We did, and thank you for it, Mike. And like I said, I wanted to do it because I mean what I say, that you're just such a great researcher. And you're just so committed to the research, and the research is about the truth and this authentic journey of humankind. And that's why I wanted to do it. And I'm very, very pleased with the show. It was an incredible. I can't believe that second hour, we'd left so much, and then in that second hour we accomplished an enormous amount. And the thing for me about having you commit to other things a little bit more that's exciting is just taking your intellect and your research capacities and your passion and your will and placing them into these different settings. And I think that's only going to be a really good thing for all of us. And that's what I'm really looking forward to. And the other thing to remember is that Mike is not saying that if something of great relevance comes out, like this last video, you had to do that with the six toes. It is a great. It's what, 22 minutes, and a great Mike Williams track at the end of the podcast as well. 22 minutes. And it'll blow your mind. It is, and so well done. And that's what Mike Williams is all about. And when you touched on it earlier, and you said, I've got a platform that's big enough, 16,000. It actually blows me away, because some of these, and I'll just say it, some of these clowns that are out there with 40, 50,000 subscribers on YouTube. That blows me away. And then when I see someone like yourself and Mark Devlin, and you're, sort of both around 10, 16,000 subscribers, that blows me away. And Colleen too. I can't believe you don't have 100,000 subscribers on YouTube. So let me state it again, folks. I mean this from the heart, that if you're not familiar with a great deal of Mike's work, I don't know how that's possible, but if you're not, get familiar with it. And if you haven't subscribed to the Sage of Quay, which I'll put the link in the show notes, please do. It's only going to benefit you by doing so. Mike is a tremendous researcher. And like I said before, if there's one person that has been really unbelievably made qualified to speak on this incredible saga of the Beatles, it's Mike, because because he's a great songwriter and he's a great musician in his own right as well. He understands these deep connections. He understands the layering in music. He understands these deep esoteric messages that Lennon, McCartney, and Harrison were putting into their songs. And there's no one really more qualified to have done this. And we're fortunate for it, because as I've said a few times, and I'll say it one last time, this whole thing with Paul is Dead could have turned into a shit show, and it hasn't. So again, Mike, let me say thank you for today. I enjoyed this so much. I was just genuinely looking forward to this for the past few weeks. And thank you very much for all that you've done, all that you do. You're a good human being, Mike.
Well, thank you, Charlie. Right back at you. You're a good human being yourself, and it's what happens. You were talking about the subscribers and stuff like that. One of the things I've learned is that if you're really seeking truth, it's a niche. Yeah, it's a niche. I mean, people have 40, 50, 60, 100,000, subscribers. I mean, it's a business for them. They're making money. It's to a large degree. Many of them are in the business of entertainment. It's conspiratainment. That's what I refer to it as.
It is.
And I don't do that, and I'm not going to sell myself out. I'm going to keep doing the things I'm doing. And if it's 16,000 people that are going to listen, then fine. It's 16,000 people. It's just the way it's going to have to be.
I have 1,300 subscribers, by the way, folks. 1,300. So there you go.
Yeah. It's better than zero, Charlie. Right? That's how I look at it.
And they're great ones. Like almost all of my subscribers are subscribers to your channel as well. And they're good. These are good folks. These are smart
Good people.
They are. Yeah, they're good folks. And it's a badge, like Colleen always says, it's a badge of honor. And that's what we were discussing last night, because I was really surprised at the number for yours, and we were just talking about it. It's a badge of honor. It's a badge of honor because you're authentic and you're telling the truth, and there's not a lot of that going on. And we just showed you with the biggest rock band in music history, an entire pop culture phenomenon. The Beatles are so much bigger than a pop band. It's so much bigger. It is a cultural phenomenon. And Mike just broke it down for you perfectly. He has been doing it. And what he's shown you in the words of the Beatles themselves, you don't have to guess on any of this. Just go back and listen to what they were saying. And they'll confirm what Mike has told you, that the biggest operation of pop culture ever is a sham. And now you have to deal with that. And where that leads you is your choice.
That's right. And 60 years, Charlie, almost 60 years of it. Ugh. It's mind-boggling.
It is. Okay, I'm going to let you go and say thank you once again. And love you, man. You're, like I said, great researcher and a great human being. Thanks, pal.
Thank you, Charlie. I'll catch you on Facebook.
Okay, take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.